Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for joining this morning's Beef Brunch Educational Series webinar. My name is Ashley Edwards. I'm a livestock agent and animal science program coordinator for the LSU AgCenter in our central, northeast, and northwest regions. I'm serving as a second speaker in our webinar today. Our first speaker is Dr. Guillermo Scaglia, professor and beef cattle nutritionist. You heard from Dr. Scaglia last month in his webinar on planning grazing of winter annual pastures. If you did miss that talk, we do have it posted on our website and our YouTube channel. And I'll have both of those listed for you at the conclusion of today's webinar. Today, Dr. Scaglia and I will be talking about management strategies for bulls in our commercial beef herds. Dr. Scaglia is going to kick us off in just a moment, but before we do get started, I want to say a few housekeeping notes. We will be muting your microphones. We ask that you please keep them muted throughout the webinar. If you've joined us online or through the Teams link or app, you can enter your questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. If you've called in on your phone, you can text your questions to me at 512-818-5476. Again, if you're calling in, you can text your questions at any time during the webinar to 512-818-5476. In the interest of time, we are going to wait to answer your questions until the end of the presentation. With that, Dr. Scaglia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us this morning, and you can get started whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards, and good morning, everybody. Today, as Dr. Edwards was mentioning, we're going to talk about bull management. In my case, I'm going to be referring mainly to nutritional management. A few comments before getting into topics. Bulls are extremely important for our herds. They contribute to half of the genetic potential for the herd. And if you start thinking about it and do a little math, in the past 3 generations of the bulls that you have used, they collaborate or they influenced 87.5% of the genetics of the herd. So they are extremely important if we want to make genetic improvement in the animals. There are many important issues with bulls, but probably one of the most important ones is the development of bulls to reach puberty and service age as a critical movement towards getting these animals ready to work. We are going to see in a minute, but depending on the breed, you may need to feed a little bit more energy than with other breeds. But regardless of the breed that we are using, getting those animals to reach puberty and an appropriate age at the moment of breeding season is extremely important. If you are buying bulls, there is also a few things that you need to take into consideration. Whenever you buy bulls, you need to give them time to get adjusted to your farm, your management, your pastures, all the surroundings where they're gonna be. You cannot buy a bull from someone and bring it the day before you start breeding season. You need to give quite some time. My suggestion would be at least 3 months before breeding season. Bulls are usually the forgotten nutritional group, and from the standpoint of a ruminant nutritionist like I am, it's pretty sad to have to say. For whatever reason, that's actually true for a lot of people. And after breeding season, you can start by taking care of them. Just don't place them in the farthest worst pasture that you may have. Just try to keep them close to the house, close to where you are usually driving around, and make sure that you check on them every day. From the standpoint of nutritional management, we are going to be talking about basically 5 different periods, from conception to weaning, from weaning to transition, and then the pre-breeding conditioning that the bulls need to have before the start of the breeding season, when you take them out, and what happened post-breeding. The first one is a PreWinning Nutrition, and of course I want to separate these into two phases. First, from conception to calving, it's extremely important that the cow, the mama cow, is actually receiving the nutrition that she needs. A lot of the development of the calf inside the dam will explain and will affect the performance of that animal when grows up. So make sure that if you are producing your own bulls, make sure that the mama cow is actually fed the way she should. From calving to weaning, it's also important, of course, colostrum production from the dam as well as milk production. That will help the young animal grow adequately according to the genetic potential that he has. So basically, from conception to weaning, the important factor is making sure that the dam has the appropriate nutrition so that she can help that young animal grow accordingly. Post-winning nutrition is also very important during this phase. Is when the animal is going to reach puberty. Now you don't want bulls to be gaining 5-7 pounds per day. You actually want them to have moderate gains, but at the same time, keep in mind that undernutrition and overnutrition may affect the animal. Undernutrition will delay puberty, and overnutrition can reduce semen production and quality. As I was mentioning before, depending on the type of or the breed that you have, the amount of concentrate in the diet of bulls may differ. Most of the beef bulls are okay with a diet that contains 40 to 60% concentrate. However, those breeds that are known to reach puberty later, you usually will need a little bit more concentrate in the diet. They need to be at a higher plane of nutrition so that they can reach puberty at the appropriate age and at the beginning of the breeding season. Conditioning prior to breeding season, another critical moment for different reasons. In the case of yearling bulls, keep in mind that those animals are still growing, and you want them to be in a body condition score of 5.5 to 6.5 at the start of the breeding season. Keep also in mind that spermatogenesis, or the production of sperm and maturation of this sperm, is produced over a 60-day period. And whatever happened during that period, over or underfeeding, will affect sperm quantity and quality. As I said before, if you have bulls on a high plane of nutrition, on an excellent diet, or you buy bulls from producers that are feeding bulls a high quality diet, you will need to step down this diet into a more normal diet, or similar to the one that they are going to be consuming during the breeding season. So in that case, if they are on a high concentrate diet, or if they have some concentrate in that diet, start to step down and increase the amount of forage in their diet. That way, you are adapting not only the rumen of the animal, but also you are adapting the animal to the environment that he's going to be during breeding season. You start with this at least 30 to 60 days prior to turn out the bulls. However, if you can start even earlier than that, go ahead and do it. You want to make sure that you're doing things right in terms of having those bulls ready to go on day one of breeding season. More importantly, for the case of yearling bulls, again, as I indicated before, that they are still growing, they need to be gaining weight as they approach breeding season. Probably this gain of around 1.5 to 2 pounds per day. Again, you don't want them, any of the bulls, to gain a lot of weight before breeding season. That might not be in a good decision to have. During breeding season, there is very limited opportunity for you to change anything on the diet of the bulls. Evidently, they are with the herd. They are working, so there is not much to do in terms of bull nutrition during this time of the year. And more specifically, animals can lose 100 to 200 pounds during the breeding season, and even yearling bulls can lose up to 350 pounds during that same time. Post-breeding season, again, as I said before, don't throw them in the worst pasture that you have. Make sure that you can keep an eye on them. Mature bulls, meaning those animals that are more than 5 years old, they don't need a high quality diet. They can do well on pasture or on a high ravage diet without any supplement. A good hay, for example, 8 to 10% crude protein with 60-65% TDN, fed at a 2% body weight may be all that they need. If you have a pasture with enough forage mass, enough availability, enough quality, it will be plenty. It might be plenty of forage for them to recover after breeding season. On the other hand, young bulls, as I said before, they are still growing. You need to feed them and make sure that they keep gaining weight after breeding season. It's going to take a while for them to recover because, as I indicated before, if they did their job, they may have lost around 300 pounds during that time. In that case, specifically on summer pastures as well as fall pastures, they may need some supplement in order for them to gain those 2 pounds per day that is recommended. Just to give you an idea, and don't take this as a recipe, but just to give you an idea of what bulls may need from the diet standpoint, after breeding season and for 270-day feeding period, with some cold stress, of course, during the winter, and with a body condition score at the beginning of this feeding period of 4, a large frame mature bull, 2,400 pound body weight with a body condition, and we want them with a body condition score of 5 to 6. They may need around 30 pounds of grass hay with around 9 pounds of cracked corn to gain a pound per day during those 270 days that the feeding period will last. With a moderate frame mature bull, lighter animal, towards trying to get them to the same body condition score, you may need a little bit less grass hay with the same amount of corn for that bull to gain a pound per day. Now, when we are dealing with yearling bulls, things as I indicated are a little different. You want them to gain more weight than mature bulls. For a large frame yearling bull, from 1,400 pounds to 2,000 pounds, 9 pounds of hay plus 19 of corn to gain those 2.1 pounds per day. If the yearling bulls is moderate frame, a little bit more grass and a little less corn will be enough for that animal to gain a pound and a half per day. Saying all this, and if you take into consideration the amount of cracked corn that you are feeding under these conditions, specifically for yearling bulls, you still need to be careful on doing so. There is a reason for that, and we know that high energy diets may have a negative impact on animals. It can increase sperm abnormalities. It can cause structural problems on the animal, as well as decrease libido. All that will decrease the overall reproductive performance. So even though we are recommending that in some cases you need to feed high energy diets, you need to be careful on how you do it. You need to take a look at them frequently and see how they are doing. You don't want them excessively fat. You don't want them to be on a bad condition at the beginning of the breeding season. Just to give you an idea, this is a study that was conducted over 30 years ago. Bulls that were developed on 100% forage with no grain versus bulls that were developed with 20% forage and 80% grain on a dry matter basis. Animals with the body weight, they ended up the feeding period with 831 pounds for the 100% forage diet versus 935 at the same age, 15 months of age. But if you look at some of the variables, animals that were receiving 80% grain in the diet were extremely fat. They have a lot more back fat. The scrotal circumference had a 1 centimeter or a little over a 1 centimeter greater in diameter. And most importantly, probably are the last two variables. There was a decrease in the sperm motility as well as a % on normal cells. So again, even though we know that these animals may need some grain in the diet, just make sure that you're not overfeeding, because after all, you're affecting the reproductive performance of the animal. And with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Edwards.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can get my stuff shared. Dr. Scaglia, are you able to see that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we're swapping gears. As Dr. Scaglia said, his background's primarily nutrition. Mine is primarily reproductive physiology. And if you've ever heard the two of us talk at any kind of conference, you know, I say reproduction is probably the most interesting, but nutrition is probably the most important, because as he just presented, if nutrition's out, then reproduction's gonna falter and be less efficient as well. So one more thing that I want to, I guess, stress or emphasize before I move on is, I'm sure you noticed as he was presenting, he's talking about a set breeding season. And so when we're making this presentation, we are talking about a defined set breeding season. That does not mean a 365-day breeding season. We're talking a 60 to 75 to 90-day breeding season in there, and then pulling the bulls out. And again, if you've been to any of our events, we've talked about why that's important. And if you would like to visit with us on how to make that happen and how to go towards that, we'd be more than happy to work with you on it. But that's what we're talking about here today. And as we move forward into the reproduction aspect of it, how do we know that from a repro standpoint that our bulls are ready, that they're ready for that breeding season? And so the most reliable measure of fertility is obviously the pregnancy rate and the number of calves that hit the ground at calving. That being said, that doesn't do us a whole lot of good as we are preparing for our breeding season and as we're going through and selecting which bulls we're going to put with which females. So in order to help with that, we do have what we call breeding sinus exams. These are performed by a veterinarian. They're very, very simple. They're very cheap. They're $50 to $75 per bull, depending on your vet and the number of bulls, how far he has to travel to get to you, etc. But I say that because if you don't have a breeding sinus exam done and you put an infertile or a subfertile bull out, a bull that has some kind of problems, and you don't get calves from him, you don't get as many calves, you don't get a good high calving rate or pregnancy rate, then what did that cost you? Because I can promise missing one calf or 5 calves or more is going to cost you a whole lot more than that $50 to $75 that you would have spent on the breeding sinus exam. So it's more than worth the amount of money that that you're putting into this. And so as it says here, it's a predictor of fertility. It does not guarantee several things, and we'll go into that. But Dr. Scaglia did mention that spermatogenesis takes about 60 to 61 days in bulls. And so you want to perform this at least 60 days prior to the breeding season. We usually start saying 60 to 90 days out, because that gives you enough time to find a backup plan, find another bull, have another plan there, or if it's something that's temporary that can be fixed, you have enough time, hopefully, to get that fixed and get spermatogenesis to occur, and you can retest that bull. Some people will test 120 days out and then retest again closer to that 60-day period too. So it does not guarantee fertility, as we say here, but it does help identify animals with problems, animals that are subfertile, things like that. The big thing too to mention is that it does not detect libido or an animal's desire to mate. And so there's a lot of different myths that go into what causes a bull's libido to increase or decrease. There is testosterone does play a role in it up to a certain extent. So there's a threshold amount of testosterone that they need for libido, but a bull that looks more masculine, a bull that has a bigger crest, a bull that has coarser hair, those sorts of things, that does not mean that he's going to have a higher libido or a lower libido. So really the only way that you're going to end up knowing how he's going to perform with females is to have him out there with females. And we'll talk about some estrus detection aids and things like that that you can use to actually monitor or manage that bull's performance throughout the breeding season. And so just to go a little bit more into a breeding soundness exam, the objective of it is to evaluate and classify the potential breeding ability. Again, it is not a guarantee. And what will happen is your vet will do a physical examination, check the feet, watch them walk, eyes, teeth, body condition. You can see on the left, I'm not sure how large your screen is. It might be a little hard to see this chart here, but there's a chart for feet and legs, eyes. They will actually do an internal evaluation, palpate. So they'll palpate the accessory sex glands, such as the prostate. They will look through and do an examination of the penis and the prepuce. They will palpate and check the testes and epididymis there, and then they will measure scrotal circumference as well. And we've got a slide on scrotal circumference coming up. So external and internal evaluation, and then also collect semen and do an evaluation of the semen. And so what they're looking for there, they're looking at overall volume, they're looking at color. Is it a milky white? Is there red? Is there blood in it? Is it yellow from him peeing during the collection? Is there anything abnormal going on there? Is it too clear? Clear would mean that you don't have a whole lot of sperm in there. You're just getting nothing but fluid. So do the semen collection and then look at the sperm under a microscope. So they'll look at concentration. So how many sperm cells per milliliter of ejaculate. They will look at morphology. What does the shape of those sperm cells look like? And what's the percentage of normal versus abnormal sperm cells? And then look at motility. Make sure those sperm are moving forward. We always use the term progressively moving forward. If they have a bent head or a neck or something like that and they're swimming around in a circle, that's not going to help once they get inside the female's reproductive tract. So those are your biggest components there of a breeding soundness exam. And then they will then classify them as satisfactory, meaning they're good to go. Deferred, meaning there's some kind of small problem that can probably be fixed before the breeding season, but you do need to retest. And then unsatisfactory is there's something that's happened or something that's wrong that they just do not need to be used for this breeding season. That could be something with the sperm count. It could be a major issue that, the bull needs to be culled, or it could be some kind of injury that's just preventing him from breeding or effectively breeding during this breeding season. So I use the example, I was in college, we were helping them do breeding soundness exams on some of the bulls at a research station. And during the collection process, one of the bulls went down and he injured his shoulder. So he was not going to be able to go out and walk through the pasture and mount and breed females that breeding season. So, he was essentially unsatisfactory for that. But by the following spring, that was for our fall breeding season, by the time, spring rolled around, he was okay and ready to go. Then on scrotal circumference, again, it's a part of the breeding soundness exam. It's also something that if you're going through and you're looking at EPDs and you're looking at purchasing bulls, young or older bulls, you will see this data there. And that's because it's correlated with a lot of different things. It actually tells us quite a bit. So the larger the testes, the larger the scrotal circumference, the more sperm producing tissue we have. So that means essentially you should have a larger sperm output there. That correlates to a larger serving capacity. You can breed more females during that breeding season. And then typically, not always, but typically it's also correlated with higher quality of semen overall. So because it's so influential, it does make up half of that breeding soundness exam score. And so there's a lot of emphasis put onto this. The other thing that we really like about scrotal circumference is that and I know this sounds bad because we're saying negative, but it's negatively correlated with puberty, meaning that the larger the testes, the earlier they typically come into puberty. And that also holds true on their progeny as well. So for every 1 centimeter increase in scrotal circumference, you see a corresponding decrease in age at puberty by about 4 days in his daughters. So that means our females, his daughters, are going to hit puberty earlier. And that's a good thing. We want them to be able to do that so we can get them bred when they hit an appropriate age and size and everything else, and we can get a calf off of them earlier, and they can start making us money a little earlier. So then that brings us into, I've mentioned serving capacity a couple of times. And so when we start talking serving capacity, it leads us to discuss bull to cow ratio. So kind of a textbook definition for serving capacity is that it's the measure of the number of services achieved by a bull under stipulated conditions. So we all know that you can have a lot of different conditions to your breeding season. And so, you know, the maturity of the cows, the size of the pasture, the terrain that the pasture's in, have you synchronized those cows? All of those things kind of play into that, but that's what we're talking about with stipulated conditions there. So the easy way to put it is how many females can he detect heat or detect estrus in, and then subsequently breed and actually get bred or get pregnant. And so that's something that we can measure, that's something we can look at. And then when we move into bull to cow ratio, that's a management decision on our side. So how many cows do we actually put with a bull? But, you know, again, how many can he service through the breeding season? That's what we're essentially asking in order to make this management decision. So that's going to depend on the bull's age. I mentioned the pasture size and terrain a while ago. Management protocols, did you synchronize those females? Are you using him as a cleanup bull following artificial insemination? What's his body condition? Those sorts of things. And there's many different aspects that go into that. So the general rule of thumb that we use for our bull to cow ratio is that a bull can handle the same number of females equivalent to his age in months. So if you're looking at a 15-month-old bull, he can handle 15 females, a 2-year-old, 24 females. And then when we start looking at our mature bulls, you're looking at 25 to 35 females. And that's when we start asking, you know, what's our pasture look like and those sorts of things. So when we start to take in some of those management considerations into account, you know, if we've synchronized those females and we have not AI'd, we've synchronized and we're using natural service, and we're talking a mature bull, you're looking at 25 females per bull. Cleanup following artificial insemination. Hopefully you've got a really good technician coming in there that's inseminated those females, and so you can actually bump them up to about 60 females there. If you're looking at a very rugged terrain, if you've had to use a lower stocking rate because the terrain is relatively rough, then you're looking at about 35 females there. On our yearling bulls, just a couple of notes, and you can see here that I've borrowed some of these slides from a talk that Dr. Scaglia has done previously. Yearling bulls are nice because they're young and they're eager and they're ready to go, but that's also a disadvantage of them. They kind of get overexcited sometimes. They typically seem to have a higher libido, and so that's what we've seen from research is they'll actually have twice the number of mounts than a mature bull, a 3-year-old or older bull. So they're excited, they're overzealous, and that can be a good thing. They do typically cost a little bit less, but you know, that's going to depend on the sale. There's a lot of sales going on right now, so some of you may be following along with some of those prices from the breeders that you usually work with. There's usually a lot more yearlings available, less picked over. Again, it just kind of depends on the year there, but typically that's what we see. And they offer some genetic improvement. They offer some new genetics into the herd. And you can go through and look at those EPDs to decide exactly what it is you're wanting to introduce and to bring in. The disadvantages, going back to the fact that they're overzealous or they're overeager. They do tend to lose a little bit more weight, which of course requires a little bit more feed for reconditioning there after the breeding season. They do tend to fall in love, and so they will follow one female or two females around, and it doesn't matter who else is in heat. They're going to stay next to their lady, and they're going to kind of ignore everyone else. If you overuse them or if you use them too hard, you know, and you compromise that body condition score, you know, they'll continue to look rough. That goes back into the fact that you're going to have to utilize more feed to recondition them to get them back up and ready to go. And they can continue to look rough until they hit about 4 or 5 years of age. So just some other general management considerations to take into account. So facilities, when you start looking at your bull pasture and your bull pen, you know, you want adequate space for them to move around. About 2 acres per bull there. You need to space their feed and water apart. Think about dominance, social dominance, which we're going to talk about in a second. But even when there's not cows or heifers around, they still are going to exert some sort of social dominance if you're talking multiple bulls together. So for the bunk space for feed, 24 to 30 inches per bull, or 8 to 12 inches if you're talking about a self-feeder there. And then I mentioned the social dominance just now. Of course, it's affected a lot by size, but also age and seniority within the group. And so if you're bringing in a new young bull, it's not always wise to introduce a new young bull into to a mature older bull. You're going to have some fighting there, and so you have to think about that. In terms of housing and management, if you have to end up ultimately introducing them somehow, how are you going to do that without losing a bunch of fences or causing injury to a bull or what have you there? Health. So we mentioned the breeding soundness exam earlier, and the fact that that's done by a veterinarian. And so, hopefully you have a working relationship with your local veterinarian who can also help you with a proper vaccination protocol, parasite control, that's deworming for internal parasites as well as external parasites, and any other things that you might need, controlling diseases with those vaccinations. The other thing that I want to mention, and I almost did a full slide on it, but when you are looking at purchasing bulls, particularly if you're not purchasing a unused yearling bull, and you're buying a mature bull, which it happens, we come in and we teach and we say buy virgin bulls, buy virgin bulls, buy virgin bulls, but it's not always feasible, I guess would be the word to say, or if you have bulls, neighbors' bulls jump the fence or whatever it may be, we run the risk of these bulls carrying trichomoniasis or trick. So I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of trick testing. Trick is a venereal disease. It's caused by the protozoan Trichomonas fetus. And so what happens is the bulls will transmit this to the cows can transmit it to a bull as well. But cows are actually able to clear it for a brief period of time. And so, within weeks or months, a cow can clear this. They can have a brief period of immunity from it. But then if exposed to a bull that carries it again, they can be reinfected all over again. So we don't really see any signs or symptoms in our bulls, but they do carry this protozoan up in their prepuce, in their sheath, along the penis. And so they then pass it on to the cows, and the cows are where we start to see the problems. So you'll see early pregnancy losses. Sometimes you don't really see the losses, but you see him rebreeding cows over and over and over again. So that leads to an extended breeding or calving season, if they do end up getting bred at all. Occasionally you'll see late-term abortions, 5 to 7 months or maybe even later, but a lot of times you end up with a bunch of open cows. Usually if a cow is infected, she's not going to carry to term. And so the cost of trick testing is very similar to a breeding soundness exam cost. You're looking at, $50 to $75 there. Again, you have to consult and work with your veterinarian to figure out the exact cost, especially if you're doing trick testing along with a breeding soundness exam. Sometimes those costs can be discounted a little bit, but it's inexpensive. I mean, just compared to the number of open cows that you would end up with if you had a bull that was positive for trick, it's worth it. It's worth getting them tested. And so just visit with your veterinarian, talk to your veterinarian, see if or when, to test these bulls. If you are transporting bulls across state lines, they do have to have a negative trick test. If you're purchasing or selling them, that does happen. So I'll try to get off that soapbox, but we do see a lot of problems with trick here in Louisiana and in other states as well. And so we highly recommend testing for it. We mentioned the yearling bulls a while ago, but bulls will also age. And so we know that we start to see a decline in semen quality and in sperm production around 6 to 7 years of age. Eventually, they do lose their social dominance to some of the younger bulls, even despite size. The younger bulls come in, they're overzealous and eager, like we mentioned earlier. And if you have a very mature bull that's 6 to 7, 8 years old, he can lose his social dominance to those younger bulls that you bring in. And then his physical ability begins to decline. And I think typically this is where we end up culling our bulls. We end up culling them often due to just the physical inability to mate or to that decrease in semen quality. So if we start to look at their physical ability to mate, do they get too heavy fronted for those females? They start to have feet and leg problems that are associated with size and weight. And your management strategies and management conditions can impact that as well. So we mentioned the scrotal circumferences, and they are important. So you do want to avoid bulls that have scrotal circumference that are inferior, that are too small. And there's charts out there that show what the scrotal size should be based off of that bull's age. You do have to watch, particularly here in Louisiana and through the Southeast, we have to watch the sheaths of these bulls. So we've got a couple of Brangus bulls pictured here, but you have to make sure they don't get too pendulous. And depending on your terrain, there can be a lot of problems that are associated with that. But one thing is if the sheath is improperly structured, if it becomes too pendulous, you do end up with issues with intromission during mating with those cows. But also too, picking up stickers and dirt and briars and whatever else, a lot of mud, anything like that can cause infections there around the sheath as well. You do want to watch these bulls. So we talked about libido, and there's not really a great way to measure it other than watching these bulls and seeing how they behave. And I know myself and several other agents that we work with have mentioned some bulls are a little shy. Some bulls like to mate at night, especially if you're talking some temperatures, which you want to avoid heat stress, but sometimes it gets a little warm in Louisiana. And so, they're not necessarily going to be going out and breeding every cow when you're out there watching them for your 30 minutes or whatever a day. And so that's where estrus detection aids come in, and they're very, very handy. A lot of times we mention estrus detection aids when we're thinking artificial insemination and synchronization programs. But things like Estrotech patches, Kmart patch, paint on the tailhead of the cows, a chin ball marker on a bull. There's a lot of different options out there. There's the heat watch system, electronic systems. There's a lot of different things with all different price tags on them. But there's very, very inexpensive ways. just painting, literally taking paint and painting the tailhead of a cow, or an Estrotech patch, or some sort of patch there on the tailhead of the cows. That's an easy way to watch and see what a bull's doing. Now, if you have multiple bulls together in a pasture, then you're going to probably want to lean towards a chin ball marker and have two different colors paint inside that chin ball marker. Those get to be a little bit cumbersome in terms of refilling them and having to get the bull up to put them on and off and all of that. But if you have different color paint inside those chin ball markers of the different bulls, then you're able to watch and see who is working and who's not. Sometimes you end up with bulls like Ferdinand that just want to lay underneath the shade tree and don't want to do anything. And, that's not helping you at all. It's overexerting, or it's causing another bull in the pasture to overexert himself. That's going to decrease, conception rates, fertility rates overall. And so I always highly recommend estrus detection aids. And again, there's a lot of different options to help you with your different management strategies. Utilizing separate breeding pastures for bulls that are less than 4 years old. Again, you have to think about social dominance. You have to take their age into consideration. And if you're putting multiple bulls into a pasture with cows, take that into consideration. How are they going to work together? Is there going to be a lot of fighting? Is one bull going to be way more dominant than the other? And so consider that. And we just mentioned reasons for culling, poor vision, structural incorrectness, low semen quality, producing inferior calves. So having multiple bulls in a pasture, knowing which bull probably bred which female, or if it could be coming from either bull, take that into consideration as well. Or it's a lot easier, of course, if you have one bull in with your females to know what his calves are looking like. And Dr. Scaglia mentioned this pretty much right when he was starting to kick off his talk, and I just appreciate it. Make sure that you do not put your bulls into a bull pasture that's way in the back or that you just drive by and you ignore. Make sure you check them every day. Make sure that you're supplementing them appropriately and keep them and watch them, because they do have obviously a huge impact on what your calves are looking like and how many calves you have each year. So as he mentioned, I believe earlier, sale day and the day that you turn them out should not be the only day that you look or think about your bull. So managing these bulls is a year-round thought process, and it doesn't have to be very difficult, but just make sure that you're not ignoring them. So, as again, the slide is from a previous talk that he's given, but, you do start preparing for the following breeding season the day you take him out from those females. So you already start to think about reconditioning him, start to look at your management calendar, think about your vaccination protocols, visit with your veterinarian on the best health protocol, think about when you're going to test him again. And so with that, I think that's wrapping us up on the presentation. Dr. Scaglia, are you able to see the chat? Do we have any questions?
I don't think, let me check again. No, we don't.
Okay. So if y'all are online with us live right now, again, you can text questions to me or you can get them into the Q&A.
Hold on. I just got a
go ahead.
I just got a question. What is the effect on fertility on breeding bulls with feeding cottonseed and effects of gossip ball? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I'm going to turn that one over to you.
Okay. That's a good question. You can actually use cottonseed on bulls. However, stop feeding it at least 2 to 3 months before breeding season. Gossip ball, there is conflict. Honestly, there is conflicting research on this issue. There are work done on it that shows that can affect semen quality. Others, there is not such an impact. However, just to be on the safe side, if you are feeding cottonseed, just stop doing it. As I said, 60 to 90 days before breeding season. Even if you are doing BSE, which after Dr. Edwards' talk, I hope you will, take into consideration that if actually that cottonseed is affecting semen quality, whenever you do the breeding soundness exam, there might be an issue with the bull. So take that date actually, and 60 to 90 days before then, stop feeding cottonseed. I hope I was clear enough. Just 2 to 3 months before breeding soundness exam, if you're doing that, or 60 to 90 days before beginning of breeding season.
Thank you. If y'all have any other questions or if you have a follow-up on that, you can go ahead and get them into the Q&A. You can also text me 512-818-5476. You do have our emails here on the screen. For those of you that are watching the recording of this, you can email any questions to us there. And I want to begin to wrap up by asking for your feedback. So if you don't mind, we always have a survey posted for each of our webinars. We do really appreciate the feedback. And it also allows us, or I guess encourages us to continue on with the series, but it allows us to see what you would like to see from us too. So we're in the process of planning webinars for next year. So if you have topics that we have not covered, things that you would like to know more about, there is a spot to put this into the survey. The way to take the survey, there's a couple of different things, but if you're on live right now, you can, or if you're watching the recording, you can take your phone, open the camera, view the QR code, a little notification banner is going to pop up at the top of your phone. You can click that and go to the survey. It takes 2 to 3 minutes to take this, so it's not very long at all. Again, we do use this and we really appreciate you taking just a few minutes to go through and evaluate our webinars. I will also post a link to this, so if you're listening to the recording in podcast format, or if you're watching it on YouTube and you prefer to use it, I will use a link to the survey in the video and podcast descriptions of the recording of this. And then just a reminder, we are recording. I do go through and edit these and get them posted, hopefully within the next week or so. But you can always go and find previous webinars and news updates on our website, lsuagcenter.com/beef brunch. I keep the previous 3 on there. But all of our webinars, all of our news updates for the Beef Brunch educational series are on our YouTube channel, which is LSU AgCenter-Livestock. And then if you like to listen to us in podcast form, or if you would like to check out our podcast, you can search Beef Brunch educational series on your favorite podcast platform, and you can get our news updates and our webinars there as well. So Dr. Scaglia, do we have any other questions?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time in presenting today, and thank all of you for joining us and watching us today or later on and watching the recording. Again, if you have any questions regarding the Beef Brunch educational series, if you have anything that you would like to have us present on, please feel free to contact me. My email is akedwards@agcenter.lsu.edu. Thank y'all, and we hope that you all have a great day.
Thank you all.